Hello everyone and welcome to today's session of Incubeta Ignite, the next steps in search. The objective of today's session is to run through Google's latest announcement about search criteria, an algorithm update which is going to shake the way that search marketers work right down to the very core, or so it's said. We're excited to be joined by our own Director of Search Experience, Joe Comotto, a brilliant SEO analyst, Bridget Hoepner, as well as being joined once again by Binary Bear's founder and CEO, Joe Doveton. Really good to see all of you, and thank you for taking the time to talk us through what this update will mean, and hopefully prepare the audience with some top tips and insights ahead of the rollout in 2021, May 2021 specifically. Now, we're going to be saying Google quite a lot through this session. So first tip will be, if you have any Google Assistant devices around you, probably switch those off. Joe, I'm going to pass over to you, and it would be really great if you could give us a small synopsis of Google's new search criteria, specifically from Joe Comotto. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Google is listening to us all. Scary. So yeah, just to be clear, what we're not referencing in this session today is the recent update that Google decided to surprise us all with on Thursday lunchtime of a core update, as if 2020 couldn't get any more interesting as it was. We are going to be talking solely about the update, the pending update that Google has been talking about all this year, that's set to launch in May 2021. Now, this update is the page experience update, as Luke's already called out. Google were talking about this update earlier in the year, around May of this year, and hinted that they would be rolling out this update without a time frame in place. And I believe that was delayed a little bit due to the onset of the pandemic. It was going to be launched out a little bit earlier, but just in November, around the middle of November, they gave everybody a heads up that we had essentially 6 months in which to prepare for the page experience update that would be rolling out in May 2021. So specifically, what is that update about? So what we're looking at here is the amalgamation of some metrics that are already available, that Google's been speaking to a number of people about. It's all over the DevTools site. The core vitals measurements that's being incorporated with a whole host of other page experience metrics that already exist. The interstitials, the page experience load speed, measurements that have been around for quite some time. What is happening is that's being combined with the core web vitals. So the mobile friendliness, the HTTPS, the no intrusive interstitials, all of those metrics in May are going to be combined and rolled out as what will be known as the page experience signals. So there's 3 metrics that exist within the new measurement, and they're largely, or they are focused around user experience, and that's the big step change here in the rollout of this update, is that we're starting to move away from what have traditionally been the core of SEO foundations, content, technical implementation, and authority. We're starting to see Google looking more at the user experience that sites are starting to offer the user, and that's a big step change on Google's side, because it's an area that they haven't really necessarily been too heavily involved in. And much like in the same way when they launched Mobilegeddon, the mobile first indexing update, they're starting to force users to really embrace user experience and make sure that they're offering a great experience on their websites.
Thanks very much, Joe. Now, Joe Doveton or Bridget, if you've got anything you'd like to add to that, please feel free to do so.
I mean, in principle, this isn't anything, really outside of the core Google mission, which is to provide a good experience for users. And they've constantly, since the start, they've told people to write and publish for users rather than search engines. It's just that I think that they've, we understood that if a visitor had arrived on your website and had bounced, Google was incorporating that into the search engine rankings a while back. But what they have done now is they've formalized instructions over 3 specific measures for webmasters to focus on as a priority. So it means that you've got 3 things in particular, outside of the stuff like HTTPS and AMP and so on, that the webmasters can get a real handle on to say, if we've got limited time, this is what we prioritize. So that's the real thing, is they've given you something that you can tangibly take and run with, that and plenty of lead time to make those changes.
Thank you very much. And Bridget, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think the important thing to also consider is that I think when you're speaking about the core web vitals to other members in your organization, it's very easy to get wrapped up in the acronyms. I think our industry is full of acronyms, but they actually are quite simple that they can be made simple to explain. So your cumulative layout shift, just being able to show a real example of what that means on your website or competitor website will speak volumes in communicating what it is that SEO is trying to achieve within the organization. It doesn't have to be as complex as it's made out to be if you can show real world examples of where this is happening. So communication or understanding the metrics and having the tools to kind of measure the metrics is important, and it's great that Google has provided us with that. But the big challenge is being able to communicate that to the rest of the organization.
Yeah, indeed. And Joe Doveton, coming back to you, SEO and UX have always been seen, or have long been seen, as separate disciplines, quite disconnected, rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly. What do brands have to consider with UX alongside this update, much more so than they have done in the past?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of us who work or have worked for digital agencies in the past, or even client side, we are guilty of siloization of some of our, if that's a word, but operating within silos within within your organization. So, an SEO team wouldn't necessarily speak to a user experience team every day, or a CRO team wouldn't liaise with an SEO team. And I mean, hopefully it's forcing people to, kind of combine these disciplines and break down those barriers a little bit more, so people are all pulling in the same direction. Because, you can get, I have seen examples of an SEO team is pulling in one direction and the UX team wants to do something else. I think in particular, where this is going to help should help, is at the earlier stages of web development, where, for example, web developers and designers will lead the early parts of that process. But actually, if you've got SEOs involved in doing things like specifying which CDN should be used, or how you go about getting content cached, or what kind of image compression you need to use when you start designing. All of these things are going to have an impact on the new measures that Google have put in place, and it will be great to see SEOs at that early stage of web development and design getting involved and saying, do this.
I think it adds a lot of weight now to the argument that brands need to be putting, and some brands do, but not all brands put the users at the center of what they're doing. And organic can kind of get left at the wayside, as does UX, in the need to kind of focus on what are deemed to be more important areas. But I think now Google started to incorporate these changes into the algorithm, and it bumps that priority up the list quite a lot to make sure that brands really take this seriously. Organic represents a significant amount of volume for a number of advertisers, quite frequently the majority of volume in the majority of instances. So to not prioritize this, to not really have an understanding of what this change means and the impact that it's going to have is will be to the brand's detriment. I think another point to point out is that Google's going to be testing the SERPs with some visual cues as to the sites that will be are deemed to be providing a good experience for users. So click-through rates of these brands are going to go up as well, particularly on mobile, because we all know what it's like when you engage with a site that loads poorly, is jumping around, you can't click on the right buttons. So it's going to be a really, really helpful aid for people that are on low speed connections, to call out the sites that they are going to get a better experience from. So if you're not one of those, you're going to be seeing some real changes to the performance metrics of your brand.
And Josie, do we have yet an indication of what those visual indications will look like?
Not yet. No, I think we're likely to see those rolled out sometime in the new year. But Google did do some similar testing when the mobile first indexing update rolled out. But they kind of fell by the wayside. We don't know if Google will continue with these visual cues, but the fact that they are testing them, you have to only deduce that they will be here to stay. But you can pretty much know that they will be very they will stand out on the page for users to see. That's very clear.
Indeed. I just want to go back to the three core vitals that you mentioned and the metrics associated with them. They sound quite technically focused. Can you just speak a little bit more about each one of those, just so our join are really clear on those?
So Google's tried to make this sound as complicated as it possibly can, but really you don't need to get too bogged down in the technicalities of it. The three metrics are essentially focused around load time, interactivity, and stability. So the first one being what's being called largest contentful paint, which is essentially the measurement of how long it takes for the main content of the page to download and be ready to be interactive with. What's measured here is the largest image or block of context within the user viewpoint. Anything outside of that viewpoint isn't taken into measurement, and you're looking here for a load time of under 2.5 seconds for it to be deemed by Google to be a good score. And then the second measurement is what's called first input delay. And we're looking for a score here of under 100 milliseconds. So a very, very different score there. And this is really essentially the time to interactivity of the page. So the time it takes for the browser to respond to the first user interaction on that page. And we're only looking at clicks or taps here. Any scrolls and zooms don't trigger the first input delay metric. And then finally is the cumulative layout shift, and that's all around stability. Essentially, how much does the page jump around whilst loading? And that's made up of a calculation by multiplying the share of the screen that has shifted unexpectedly by the distance it has travelled. And we're looking for a score there of under 0.1. So we're looking really on the cumulative layout shift, things like images that don't have dimensions set, intrusive ads that are jumping around. That's one that's been called out that could have quite a big impact here. Dynamically injected content, web fonts causing certain issues, and actions waiting for a network response before uploading the DOM. So that one is quite technical, but if you really kind of just break them down into loading, interactivity, and stability, those are kind of how advertisers and brands need to think about these new metrics.
Great, thank you very much. And Bridget, what kind of tools are you finding useful that you could share with people for measuring those 3 metrics and perhaps some other metrics too?
Well, there's the Lighthouse in web development tool. So that's a really useful tool to seeing how your page is loading, how scripts are loading. So that's definitely a good point of call. Then we've got your page speed insights. Of course, page speed being one of the page experience metrics that are also very important, alongside the core web vitals. And then, of course, I should have mentioned first is the actual core web vitals report within Google Search Console. And then your Google Analytics, always to actually see how these improvements are actually impacting real traffic, because at the end of the day, yeah, it's your real traffic and your real conversions that you're wanting to improve on the back of improving, a score. So those would be a good start.
So it was Lighthouse, Page Speed Insights, Search Console, and Google Analytics.
Yep. Yeah.
And we can perhaps put links in the comments below after this.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. No problem.
What's interesting about this is I was doing some additional reading around it and found a blog post where they used Google Lighthouse on some of Google's own properties.
Yeah.
And at the moment, Learn Digital and Think with Google, which is Google properties, plus also Moz and HubSpot, none of them pass any of the recommended metrics. So, Google themselves aren't fully compliant with it. So, they've given people plenty of opportunities. There's 6 months here to go through that, but it's something that I think webmasters need to get on pretty much straight away, because we know what their workload's like. But there's a lot of content, it is dense, the Google guidelines on these changes. But if you read them in detail, there's plenty of good guidelines on stuff that you should be doing. So
it's clearly a lot of work for all people considered, in Google included within that. And Bridget, perhaps we'll come back to you. And I think there are lots of reasons that we might look at this as an update, which could be a force for good. But brands, of course, are going to have to up their game when it comes to their SEO and UX together. And with that being said, how do you think this will impact on both existing and new brands with their websites, and considering how they build or adapt them?
Sure. So I guess previous updates, or some of them, have targeted certain sectors. For example, there was the update that targeted YAML websites, but the core web vitals update doesn't really have a specific sector that it's focusing on. It's all websites. It's all about usability. So there's not really different recommendations for different sectors. However, there are certain types of websites that need to pay close attention. So publishers are one. So if you rely on top news stories as a primary driver of traffic, you'll need to pay special attention, because previously AMP was a condition or a criteria to be featured in top news stories, but that's actually being dropped. And instead, there will be a minimum core web vital score, which will be a criteria to be featured in top news stories. So you can definitely see how, if you don't get your house in order in terms of core web vitals and you rely on top news stories, how that can have a serious negative impact on your traffic. And I guess an important thing for existing brands to remember is that while the metrics are really helpful to measure and monitor performance, you really need to just take a step back and think about your users and what are they actually trying to achieve on your specific site, and what can you then do to improve their user experience. So again, if you're a publisher, like, the main intent of a user is to read news stories. So if you have ads that are only fully loaded once your user is in the middle of an article, and then that shifts the article around, that is going to be a really frustrating user experience and a serious usability problem. So there's a real life example of where you need to focus on addressing your cumulative layout shift and look at improving that metric, but always boil it down to real examples so it resonates with the rest of the organization. Then for your e-commerce sites, so whether retail or travel, So the main intent of the user is to browse or to research or to compare or to buy products. So there is a really high level of interactivity. So you need to look at, depending on what tools you have on your website, how fast does it take to filter products, for example, or how fast does it take to use your comparison tool if you have one, or to add to cart, so on. So if all of those touch points are not fast, there's going to be friction between your user and your website, poor user experience, and ultimately that will result in lower revenue. So really look at your own website. Like the core web vitals are one thing, but really look at your own website and look, what is the user actually trying to achieve? And then how do the core web vitals help me to measure that friction and to improve it, really, to improve the performance of the website. For new brands, I guess in this case, they may actually have the upper hand when it comes to this specific ranking signal.
Yeah.
It's more on the tech side of things. So compared to other ranking signals, which perhaps focus on authority or backlinks, yeah, we actually do have the upper hand a bit. I think a lot of established brands are actually hampered by legacy systems. And I think we've all encountered fixing what already exists is often more challenging than building according to best practice from the ground up. So, and definitely as what Joe also mentioned earlier, is that, you know, SEOs need to be in the beginning or be involved in the beginning of the build alongside designers and developers. And I would really encourage brands, whether they're old or new, who are using CMS platforms to actually inquire about like upcoming releases or improvements, and see if they are focusing on core web vitals specifically. Because, you know, a lot of brands, you know, we're using CMSs, we're using platforms. So how are these platforms actually responding to core web vitals and page experience? Because it's becoming more and more important, and isn't going to be something that is reduced in importance. It's only going to get more important, page experience in general. So definitely, if you're a new brand and shopping around for a CMS platform, definitely worthwhile asking, you know, what about your CMS platform separates you in terms of page experience from the next? See what they say.
And Bridget, that's really interesting for e-commerce, for example, where, you know, they're working with a Magento or a Shopify or a BigCommerce or someone else. What kind of things should they be looking out for? What kind of questions might they be asking their e-commerce platform partners in the run up to May? And then Joe Doveton, coming on to you after that, you mentioned some reasonably straightforward things that can be considered, like the image optimization. So perhaps I'll come to you after that as well.
Okay, well, I can deal with the first bit of that, or do you want Joe C to deal with it?
Go ahead, Joe, and then back down to Bridget.
I mean, Bridget's absolutely right. So, I mean, I suppose one of the things that I would say is a risk is that for newer brands or a brand that's getting a website built, you have to make sure that the development company that you've hired to build your site is on top of all this stuff, because it's going to be really vital. But the questions that they should be asking of them are, you know, who's doing the hosting? You need super fast, lightning fast hosting. You need a good CDN. So, you know, a kind of Amazon Web Services or a Cloudflare. Start doing page caching, and image optimization has for some time been, you know, one of the measures that on Google Lighthouse they talk about using JPEG 2000 and other next generation web formats. I suppose where this becomes difficult is if you're an e-commerce brand with a huge inventory of photographic assets. You know, that's a lot of work to optimize. So, you know, it's especially if some of these pages, things like, for example, top level category pages, product pages, you know, these are key landing pages as well. You know, these guys need to get on this pretty quickly, because 6 months is not a long time to optimize an entire inventory of product images.
And are there some tools available to them that can help speed that process up, or is it really manual process in terms of image optimization?
Well, I mean, there are. To be honest, I don't know of any tools specifically that do that for you. I mean, you can do minification. So I think there's gzip and so on. It's not something I know a lot about, to be honest.
So thanks so much, Joe. Back now to Bridget, and then we've got some questions from the audience. So Bridget, just to reiterate on the question, where there's third-party platforms, like specifically in e-commerce, what should brands be looking out for? What kind of questions might they be asking those platforms in the run-up to May?
Well, I guess, going back to what your main core objective is for your users, if it's an e-commerce site, for example, and something as basic as filtering, it could be something that isn't quick, something that isn't fast, something that actually frustrates your effort of browsing more than anything else. And of course, there's a lot of third-party plugins and widgets that, the objective is to actually simplify your development, which it well may do, but it actually may add additional or reduce the interactivity, reduce the speed. So it's not only the functionality that you have to look at, but it's also the speed that you have to look at. So, whether that's filters, whether that's an improved checkout process, it needs to go through that layer of speed and interactiveness before dedicating yourself to buying into that platform or plugin or widget.
Yeah, got it. Thank you very much. Right, we've got some questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with one for you, Joe Comotto. The question is from Chloe, and she asks, will the impact of the changes vary across sectors? We've spoken a little bit about e-commerce and publishing, but of course there are a range of other sectors. So will the impact be felt, and will it vary across various sectors? So Joe, you kick us off with that one, but Joe Doveton or Bridget, if you've got anything to add, then freestyle it.
I think it will, yes. I think it really depends on the your competitive set that your brand is in. I think, if you're in a sector that has invested heavily in site performance and UX, and you're going to see less impact of this algorithm update within those sectors. But if you're in a channel that hasn't, and your competitors haven't, and you invest heavily in making sure that you're remedying any issues off the back of the core Web Vitals audits that you do, then you're going to see much better traction. So it's really kind of hard to say any specific industries that will benefit from it, but it's really kind of how's your peer set doing in that space? Have they invested? And if they haven't, there's a real opportunity for you to see better performance within your vertical off the back of that. I think some sectors have taken UX and site performance a lot more seriously than others. I think travel's probably one of those that has spent a lot of time optimizing the user journey on their site and making sure that's as painless as possible. But there are clearly other industries that I won't name any, but that won't have taken the time to invest in that space. So I think it really depends.
Great, thank you. Bridget or Joe Doveton, anything to add?
Nothing from me particularly.
Bridget?
I think just following on from what Joe said, you're definitely going to have to benchmark yourself against competitors just to contextualize things a bit. And there are so many ranking factors. So you really, it's a situation of, do you focus on core Web Vitals first, or if you were a financial site that was really hit hard by like the YAML mesh or update, you may want to consider focusing on your content before, or as a first point of call for 2021. So you really just have to look at your own website and see what to go after first. But yeah, definitely benchmark and look at your own individual performance.
That's a really good tip there in terms of benchmarking. And of course, 6 months to go. Should brands start benchmarking now and measure themselves over the next 6 months versus and relative to their peer set?
Definitely, because there's so many aspects that can change your own core Web Vitals score across the board. So to contextualize it against your competitors would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think also to add to that point as well is that this isn't a one-off piece of work, right? This is a continual measurement piece that clients and brands will need to undertake. The website undergoes so many code changes and updates, new technology, new functionality that gets added to the back end that can have an impact on all of those measurements. So it's really key that brands have some sort of measurement platform in place. They're not just looking at core web vitals, but all of the other page load speed metrics that go into that as well, and they continually measure that on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. And one of the things, Joe, you should do is have somebody, if let's say, for example, you're on a WordPress site, you're regularly going in and auditing your WordPress plugins. I've had experience with clients recently where we've gone on after a couple of months and dozens more WordPress plugins have been added in we didn't know about, which have obviously slowing the site down. So you need somebody, asking the question, do we actually need this at this moment in time, or was it installed as a one-off? And get the stuff off that you don't need. Yeah,
you see it time and time again, right? Sites that become bloated over time, that they've had functionality added to it and nobody really knows what that does anymore, or code that doesn't have any sort of function or tags. It's really going to need advertisers to be a lot more stringent in what gets added to their site and being aware of the impact that has on the performance.
That brings us nicely on to the next question, which is from Tom. And Joe Doveton, I'm going to pass it in your direction, but again, Bridget and Joe Comotto, if you want to add in, please do. In your experience, how much does running A/B tests on a page affect that page's performance, if at all?
So it does affect it, and you're depending on which tool you're using, how it's set up. But you're looking at 1 to 2 milliseconds sometimes in order to execute the scripts that make the test run. In theory, Google should not penalise you for that because Google's got a bit of a blind spot here in terms of the guidelines that they use about A/B testing tools and search results. But they can tell you that you're running an experiment. It shouldn't affect your test results, your search rankings. But the key thing is is to make sure that as soon as you possibly can, if you've got a result, you're applying that new test winner, you make that the permanent version of the page. It's a bit more complicated if you're doing a URL redirect test, and there are some good guidelines out there about making sure that you 302 the variant back to the original page, so that Google knows that that's the canonical version of the page. It does affect site experience. Most testing tools have some methods that they use to offset that, whether it's serving a blank page of CSS, where they try and avoid a flicker of the original page, but it is going to affect the overall experience. But what you have to weigh up is, what are the long-term benefits of doing ongoing experimentation versus not doing anything.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Bridget or Joe, anything to add?
I mean, I think as your last kind of comment was, Joe, that it's not worth not testing if there's going to be marginal page experience implications. It's just, not worth it.
Got it. So another question from, I think this is from Neil, and it references the update that came just last week. And it says, do you think that with these algorithm updates, these more major ones, the core broad updates, such as the one we saw last week, will be less impactful over time? That's an open question. So who would like to answer that one?
I don't think the Web Vitals update will be less impactful, because the core update is an update that's the current. It's not a major addition to the algorithm. It's more of an update of what currently exists. So you're not.
I don't think it really changes that, does it? This is in addition to. I think we're likely to see more thrown into the page experiences update and more emphasis given to those types of metrics. But like Bridget's saying, I don't think this really changes how Google rolls out the core updates, or whether they're impactful or not. They're kind of two separate sides of the coin, so to speak.
Right.
And I think if you're following the guidelines and you're doing everything as ethically as you can, you should be minimising the effect of these updates anyways. This is more, I think the page speed, the core vital stuff is more fundamental in terms of a shift, because so many people have not prioritised it before, and now they will need to.
Yeah, indeed. So it's business as usual in that regard, by the sounds of it. Right, one final question, which is coming in from Jake. Bridget, we'll start with you, and then Joe Doveton, and then finish with Joe Comotto. What needs to be the biggest focus for SEOers in 2021?
Good question. So as we're aware, core web vitals and page experience in general is just one of many ranking factors. But what we do really need to take note of that does point to more and more, and as we've mentioned throughout this webinar, that brands need to place user experience at the focus of SEO, but the focus of their business as well. So simply put, what is good for the user is also good for SEO, and that actually needs to be adopted as a mindset for SEOs. I know this can be challenging considering that the acronym stands for Search Engine Optimization, but I think we could almost actually ditch that acronym and find something that's appropriate for your business and that actually speaks to what SEOs, as we call it, are trying to achieve. So just following from above, I think this is where one of the biggest challenges will come in with SEO, is to first adopt that mindset, but then get others within your organization to adopt this mindset. And if you think about SEO, it's often falsely seen as the tactic or the discipline that drives organic traffic, but it's not the only discipline that drives organic traffic. SEO, along with UX, along with CRO, it really exists to make the user experience better, and that is not only across organic traffic. It doesn't only benefit organic traffic, but it's actually benefits every other source of traffic on your website. So it's a good place to start if you want to get other stakeholders in the organization to really take note of what the benefits of SEO are. It's not just to improve the quality and volume of organic traffic. There's benefits across all channels of the website. And just as an example, page speed, it traditionally falls under SEO, but it has an impact on the conversion rate of every single channel. If you look at your information architecture or your taxonomy, traditionally also falls under SEO, but it really impacts your merchandising. It impacts how searchers or users navigate your site. So it's far wider than just what keywords are going to target what landing page. Far exceeds that function. Page content, for example, also often an SEO kind of functional activity, but it improves your quality score for page search and has benefit for page search. So really, SEO cannot be seen as a discipline to improve organic traffic. It's a discipline to improve traffic regardless of where it's coming from on your website. So I guess the biggest focus should be less on ticking the boxes when it comes to SEO, but really about getting other stakeholders in the organization to understand what it is that SEO does, the benefits of SEO, and as a result, be able to actually secure resources for SEO and other tactics that SEO benefits from, whether that's content, whether that's your development resources, whether that's your UX, whether that's digital PR, because that's really where you're going to see cumulative results with your organic search is if you get buy-in and assistance and resources from other parts of the organization, essentially. I do think that EAT is going to continue to have a really big impact in 2021. And I think we've actually already seen that with the latest core update. So, there's still a lot of dissecting and comparisons to be done on who the winners and losers are. But from what I've seen, it's the expertise, the authority, and the trustworthiness of content that is really standing out. So again, if we put on the SEO hat, we have a beautiful piece of content, the structure is correct, the keywords are great, the heading is great, everything ticks the SEO boxes, but there's no citations to expert sources, or it hasn't been written by an expert, or there's been no consideration in ensuring that it's unique and it's just recycled bit of content. So that's where I think if content is a big part of your site, which it really should be, then I think focusing on your expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness for your content, should be another priority for 2021. And I think, of course, we've seen how it's impacted finance and health sectors the most, but it's going to, I feel, start impacting other sectors more and more. I mean, if we just think of COVID and how much misinformation was out there, and how much harm it could have done if Google did not set those high levels of relevancy and trustworthiness and authoritativeness to content, it would have had even more of a negative impact than it has. So definitely, just to summarize, focus on SEO that is user-centric, maybe even ditch your SEO acronym if you have to. Change how SEO is seen in your organization, and ensure that you have the correct resources in your organization for SEO, and focus on your expertise and your authority and your trustworthiness of your content. So those would be my three, I guess.
Very good. I was going to summarize for you there, but you've done it perfectly. So thank you very much, Bridget. Joe Doveton and Joe, just in closing thoughts, anything you would add there to Bridget's, very clear and very, I think, impactful kind of repositioning of SEO in 2021?
Everything Bridget said. I'll just add that I agree. Content still remains king, and good, authoritative, quality content. This is just a new dimension for SEO to start moving into, and I think people need to give it the time and attention that it needs and deserves.
Absolutely. And Joe Doveton, thank you.
In terms of what Bridget just said, I think she's absolutely right. I mean, the main thing you should concentrate on is, what does the user actually want? How do they want to interact with your brand? Because SEO these days is so much more than just the traditional old search engine results pages. So, if you really fully understand what your users need, you should be generating great content for them, whether it's if they're a local visitor, on Google My Business, if they need a question that's answered best by a graphic or an infographic or a graph, by doing that, or even if it's a one word or one sentence query through voice, it's what it's always been, which is about, what do your users want? How do they want to interact with your brand? Give them that.
So it's really a repositioning of search and user experience optimization in 2020.
Search experience. Yeah,
exactly. Perfect. Thank you very much for those answers to those questions. There are a number of questions, a long list of questions actually, that we have received that we just haven't got time now to go through. We will be sure to follow up with those answers. Thank you to the panelists in advance for committing to that. And our viewpoints will be emailed to you in the coming days. In closing, I want to thank our guests, Joe Doveton and Bridget and Joe of Incubeta, for taking the time today to share their insights, their fears, and actually most importantly, their hopes for what the impact of this UX-focused algorithm change may bring from May 2021 onwards. I think that's been a really valuable discussion, and really thank you very much for the preparation and everything that you've shared in this session today. And then finally, thank you all of the audience for joining this session of Incubeta Ignite. We hold them frequently, so please do come to the next one. Please leave some reviews if you've enjoyed what you've heard. Please also add any additional questions that you may have in the comments below, and we'll be sure to answer those for you as well. I hope you found it useful and worthwhile, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Have a great rest of your week, great December, and thank you very much. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much.